Minister, as you know, we've just passed the 50th anniversary of the Dublin Monaghan bombings, where 34 people were murdered and 258 injured in an atrocious bombing carried out by loyalists, but almost certainly with the collusion of the British state or elements of it. And they are still fighting for justice. And the question really is about the Irish government and state's responsibility to assist and cooperate with the families and victims in order to get the truth and justice they've been campaigning for 50 years. What has the government done since we met in this House a few weeks ago to discuss that tragedy?
Thank you, Thank you, and thank you, Deputy. As you've rightly pointed out, last month marked the 50th anniversary of the Dublin and Monaghan bombings of 1974. And I think it's deeply regrettable that to date no person, no individual has been held responsible for what were absolutely barbaric attacks, killing 34 people and injuring 258 and impacting many, many more lives. The Garda investigation files into these bombings and the murders that took place remain open. It's still an ongoing file. Any new evidence that comes to light, that has come to light, that may come to light from whatever source will be pursued by An Garda Síochána. In terms of engagement with the families and survivors, last month, obviously the 17th of May, senior government representatives joined families of the victims and survivors at commemorative events. The Taoiseach Taoiseach, Minister Humphreys attended, as well as other colleagues. Every year, government representatives attend these commemorations, reflecting the ongoing commitment of government to the victims and survivors. State-level engagement by officials also takes place on a regular basis. Officials meet and engage with families of the victims and survivors with their representative group, Justice for the Forgotten. State funding is provided to Justice for the Forgotten under the Reconciliation Fund of the Department of Foreign Affairs. It's an organisation, obviously, as you know, that supports families affected by the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, and this support has been keen in enabling those families to pursue their campaign for justice and indeed truth. In terms of other supports to the families and survivors of the Dublin and Monaghan bombings in their campaign for justice and truth, there are many instances where records related to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings have been made available, and the Department of Justice and Garda records were released to the Barron and the McEntee inquiries. More recently, I've implemented bespoke measures to enable An Garda Síochána to provide access to relevant information relating specifically to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. This is to Operation Denton as part of the ongoing independent UK Canova review. Operation Denton is an analytical review by the Canova investigating team looking at the activities of a particular group of individuals known as the Glenane Gang in Northern Ireland. As an analytical review is being carried out in another jurisdiction rather than a formal criminal investigation, there was actually no legal basis upon which Garda assistance could be provided. This created at the time a legal obstacle on delivering to the strong desire of An Garda Síochána, myself and of course the government overall, to cooperate with Operation Denton to the maximum extent possible. To unblock this, it was necessary to create a dedicated cooperation mechanism. So in the summer of 22, I signed a directive under section 25(1) of the Garda Síochána Act 2005, directing the identification and preparation for release of relevant material to Operation Denton. Subsequently, in order to facilitate then the transfer of the information to Operation Denton, I signed the necessary data protection regulations. This assistance has been acknowledged most recently by Sir Ian Livingston, the head of Canova, who referenced the high level of cooperation that they are receiving from An Garda Síochána and the ongoing support of the Irish Government. Can I assure you, Deputy, of my continuing commitment to supporting An Garda Síochána in pursuing this work and providing the greatest assistance possible. An Garda Síochána are continuing to engage with Operation Denton, and anything that emerges from that review will be considered in the context of their open investigations. But I again would call on any person who has any information, even no matter how small they think it might be in relation to the bombings, to make contact with An Garda Síochána. Finally, a core part of supporting the families is through the implementation of the all-party Dáil motion, which call on the British Government to allow access by an independent international judicial figure to all relevant documents relating to a series of bombings, including the 1974 Dublin and Monaghan bombings. This remains a priority, and again I can assure the Deputy that the Government continues to raise this regularly with the British Government, most recently at the BIIGC, which took place last April. These are meetings for myself and the Taoiseach to attend weekend with their UK counterparts, and it gives us an opportunity to discuss many issues, but in particular as well to discuss individual legacy cases with the UK Government. We are absolutely committed to seeking out the truth behind these absolutely appalling events and to secure some measure, and I say that some measure of comfort for the victims' families and indeed the survivors as well. Thank you.
Minister, there's no doubt the British Government have a lot of questions to answer, and I think most people believe they don't want to answer them because of the extent of British state collusion with the people who carried out the Dublin Monaghan bombings and indeed other massacres carried out by the Glenanne gang. But the Irish Government has very, very serious questions to answer. The investigations into the Dublin Monaghan bombings, the greatest single atrocity in the Troubles, were closed down after 10 weeks. What's the explanation for that? Where are the files in relation to the decision to do that? The Sackville Place bombing 72-73, also carried out by the Glenanne gang, investigation closed down after 7 weeks. A question I put into you among a series of questions recently on foot of requests from survivors and families was, why were the families themselves from 1993, when they put up a memorial in the Garden of Remembrance to their loved ones, put under Garda surveillance and then kept under Garda surveillance for years? Now I asked, where are the files about who ordered that? Was it the government? Was it the guards? Where are the files in terms of the monitoring of the families of the victims of the Dublin Monaghan bombings? And in the answer I get from you, basically we say that's an operational matter for the Garda. I mean, are you serious? If the government is serious about getting to the truth and justice for the families and victims of this awful atrocity, are you seriously suggesting that that's an acceptable answer to the question about why the families of the victims were put under Garda surveillance when they started to campaign for truth and justice?
Deputy, I appreciate that this is and has been for a long time extremely difficult for families, and I know in many of your questions as well you've sought information as to why Garda files cannot be given to the families and why any Garda files relating to this case at all cannot be given to the families. This is an open case. This is still an open file. This is information that the Gardaí have relating to an ongoing case, and it is the case irrespective of whether it's something as significant and large scale and devastating as this, or an individual case relating to one or two people. If there is an open file, if there is an ongoing investigation, if Gardaí have information relating to that, it's not something that can ever be released. It's not something that will ever be provided to the families. Information has been provided to the Baron and to the McEntee inquiries, and obviously those inquiries took place and that information was provided on that sound legal basis. You have also information that's within my own department, but obviously there is archives legislation which sets out when and how and where information can be provided, and obviously the law will be adhered to in that regard. But and I appreciate the difficulty that this puts on the families, but where you have an open case, this is not something that the Gardaí have said is a closed case. They are actively and seeking information to see if there's anything further that can be done here. They are actively engaging with Operation Canova and Denton. They are actively seeking the truth as well, to try and find the truth and answers for families, because I said at the very outset, I think it is beyond regrettable that nobody has been held responsible for these atrocities, and as a government we will do everything that we can to continue to work with the Gardaí, to continue to work with our UK counterparts, but above all to continue to work with the families to try and find answers, but above all to hold somebody responsible for these atrocities.
You see, what that sounds like is the families are never going to be given the files, never being given an explanation, never get the truth and justice that they deserve. I mean, it is shocking beyond belief that the families and survivors of this atrocity were put under Garda surveillance. Now, they are entitled to know who ordered that, what files were generated on foot of it, why was that done, and you know, the original investigation was closed down after 10 weeks. There has to be files in relation to these things. But everything is lost, can't be found, or can't be provided to the families and the legal representatives of the families and the victims. And if we know that Britain doesn't want to release this stuff because of the implications of exposing British state collusion with these atrocities, it stinks to high heaven that the Irish state isn't being open and transparent about the information that's available, about decisions the Garda took, the failure to investigate, the failure to interview families and victims until Boucher knocked on their door. What, 40 or 45 years later? I mean, this is shocking stuff. It stinks to high heaven, Minister. And what you're really saying is, we're never going to know the truth until the guards decide to disclose the information, and they're probably never going to disclose the information because they're very serious questions to be answered. I mean, it really isn't good enough, Minister, and I think the government have to do something here. You know, ultimately the guards are answerable to the Department of Justice and to the government.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you. And Tara, to conclude.
I think what's been made very clear is that the Gardaí are engaging. In fact, the structures that needed to be put in place to allow the Gardaí to provide information where they couldn't with the current ongoing investigation, those measures were implemented and changed so that Gardaí could provide the information that they have. It's been made very clear to me that the information is being provided, that they are cooperating, that they do want to engage, that they do want to uncover the truth here, just like all of us. And I appreciate, from the point of view of the families, the disappointment at not being able to access certain information, but when you have a file that's open, that's ongoing, irrespective of the case, irrespective of the number of people involved, irrespective of when it happened, you cannot provide information that might prejudice an ongoing case. We need to make sure that we continue to do everything that we can to uncover the truth here, and that's exactly what this government has done over many, many years. But again, I cannot stress how regrettable it is that nobody has been held accountable, but we must continue to work in whatever way that we can to try and change that.